Before the lands between knew the golden glow of the Erdtree, before Queen Marika ascended to godhood, before the two fingers guided Empyreans toward their divine destiny, there existed something far more ancient, a cosmic force dwelling in a lightless void beyond comprehension. An entity that would fracture existence itself and reshape the very fabric of reality. This is the story of the Greater Will, the creation myth that underpins everything in the world of Elden Ring, and the truth that lies beneath centuries of golden dogma. Chapter 1: The One Great, Before Creation. In the very beginning, before the concept of separation or individuality existed, there was the One Great. This primordial unity represented absolute totality, a state where all things existed not as distinct entities, but as a singular, undivided whole. The One Great was completeness incarnate, an existence without fracture, without division, without the concepts of self and other that would come to define all subsequent life. The nature of the One Great remains shrouded in mystery, deliberately obscured by time and the machinations of those who would rather the truth remain buried. What we know comes from whispers, from those who oppose the current order, from those who remember or claim to remember what came before. The three fingers, that grotesque manifestation of chaos and flame, dwelling deep beneath Leyndell, speak of the One Great through their maiden Hayata. Her words, delivered after consuming the cursed Shabriri grapes and standing at the threshold of the frenzied flame, paint a picture of what existed before the Greater Will's intervention. All that there is came from the One Great. Then came fractures and births and souls. This fracturing was not a natural evolution, not an organic blossoming of diversity from unity. According to those who serve the frenzied flame, the Greater Will enacted this division, this splitting of the One Great into countless fragments. Where once there was perfect unity, the Greater Will created separation. Where once there was wholeness, it brought individuation. But the adherents of the three fingers frame this act as a cosmic mistake, a catastrophic error that birthed not just life and consciousness, but also suffering itself. They claim that torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every form of anguish that plagues existence, all of it stems directly from this original fracturing. The creation of discrete, separate beings capable of experiencing themselves as individuals, apart from the whole, introduced the very concept of suffering. Where there had been no distinction between self and other, there could be no loneliness, no conflict, no pain of separation. Whether this interpretation represents truth or the biased perspective of those who seek to undo creation itself remains uncertain. The Frenzied Flame's followers advocate for the return of all things to the One Great, a melting away of all separation through the yellow chaos flame until everything becomes one again. They view the greater will's fracturing as an error that must be corrected, a wound in the cosmos that must be cauterized through total annihilation and rebirth. Yet we must consider the possibility that the fracturing of the One Great was not malevolent but necessary, that the creation of individual souls, of distinct consciousnesses, capable of growth, love, struggle, and triumph, represents not a mistake, but an evolution. That suffering exists not because creation was flawed, but because suffering is the inevitable companion of genuine experience, of real stakes, of meaningful existence. What remains undeniable is that the greater will's action fundamentally altered the nature of reality. From the One Great's unity emerged multiplicity. From its stillness emerged motion and change. From its eternal present emerged the flow of time and the progression of events. The greater will fractured totality, and from those fractures came births, the emergence of new beings that had never existed before. From those fractures came souls, discrete centers of consciousness and identity that could perceive themselves as separate from the universe around them. This act of cosmic division rippled outward through what would become existence, creating the fundamental structure upon which all subsequent reality would be built. The greater will had taken the first step toward creating order, toward establishing a cosmos governed by laws and principles rather than existing in undifferentiated unity. But order, as the lands between would learn, comes at a cost. The creation of separation meant the creation of relationship. Things that are distinct from one another can relate to one another, can affect and be affected by one another. This would become one of the fundamental principles of the Golden Order to come, the law of causality, the recognition that all things exist in chains of relation, that actions have consequences, that meanings pull at one another across the gulf of separation. Yet, even as the greater will fractured the One Great, even as it created the fundamental conditions for existence as the land between would come to know it, another principle was embedded in the fabric of reality, a counterforce to endless separation, a gravitational pull back towards unity. This would manifest as the law of regression, the yearning of all things to converge, the pull of meaning that draws separate entities back towards wholeness, even as they remain distant. Those two forces, causality and regression, the push of separation and the pull of unity, would become the philosophical foundation of the Golden Order's fundamentalism. But that development lay far in the future, separated from the moment of the One Great's fracturing by eons of cosmic and earthly history. What became of the one great after its fracturing? Did it cease to exist? Its essence distributed among all the fragments that emerged from its division? Or does it persist in some form, a memory or a potential that haunts existence, drawing certain entities and ideologies toward the goal of reunification? The Three Fingers certainly believe in the possibility of return, and the capability to melt all things away and restore what was lost. Whether their belief represents achievable reality or delusional fantasy, only the ending of the frenzied flame might reveal. Chapter 2. The Greater Will. The greater will itself exists as something beyond conventional understanding, a cosmic force dwelling in what is described as a lightless void. This void should not be imagined as mere empty darkness, but as an absence so profound that even the concept of light has no meaning within it. The greater will resides in a realm beyond the stars, beyond the cosmos, as inhabitants of the lands between understand it, in a space that predates and transcends physical existence. The nature of the greater will, as presented in Elden Ring, deliberately evokes uncertainty and ambiguity. We never encounter the greater will directly. We never hear it speak, except through intermediaries whose reliability grows increasingly questionable as we delve deeper into the game's lore. The greater will remains ineffable, a distant abstraction that shapes reality through vassals and envoys rather than direct action. Count Ymir, the high priest who tends the cathedral of Metyr in the shadow of the Erdtree expansion, wears a hat whose circular design at the top represents the greater will and its lightless abyss. This simple iconographic choice reveals volumes about how the greater will was conceptualized by those who claimed to serve it. A circle, perfect and complete, containing nothingness. A symbol that is simultaneously everything and nothing, presence and absence, form without substance. The greater will is never explicitly identified as an outer god in Elden Ring, despite many players and scholars in the game's lore assuming this classification. The outer gods, entities like the formless mother who blessed Moog, the rot god sealed by Melania's mentor, the dark moon that Ranni fears and follows. These beings are named and described as outer gods with explicit confirmation. The greater will, despite its cosmic nature and its arrival from beyond the stars, occupies a category that seems deliberately distant. Perhaps the greater will is not merely an outer god, but something more fundamental, something that predates or supersedes the category of outer god entirely. Where outer gods seem to represent specific principles or domains, aspects of reality like rot, blood, death, madness, the greater will appears to represent order itself. Not a particular order, not a specific arrangement of laws and principles, but the very concept of order as opposed to chaos, The idea that reality can be structured according to laws rather than existing in primordial randomness. This distinction matters because it suggests that the greater will's relationship to the cosmos differs fundamentally from that of other outer gods. Where they vie for influence, competing to shape reality according to their particular nature, the greater will created the very framework within which such competition became possible. By fracturing the one great and establishing the conditions for individual existence, the greater will made it possible for multiple divine entities to exist and conflict with one another. The greater will's vassals and envoys become central to understanding its nature and goals precisely because we cannot approach the greater will itself. The first of these envoys to arrive in the lands between was Metyr, Mother of Fingers, described as the magnificent gleaming daughter of the greater will. She came as a shooting star, the first to fall upon the lands between, carrying within her the capacity to communicate with her distant progenitor. Later would come the Elden Beast, sent within a golden star, bearing with it the greater will's vision of order that would eventually become the Elden Ring itself. These two envoys, Metyr and the Elden Beast, represent the greater will's primary instructions for shaping and governing the lands between. Yet, as we will see, the relationship between the greater will and its vassals proved far more complicated and troubled than the faithful of the Golden Order ever suspected. The greater will's method of operation reveals much about its nature. It does not descend to micromanage reality. It does not manifest physically to enforce its vision. Instead, it sends proxies, creates hierarchies of intermediaries, establishes systems meant to perpetuate themselves in its absence. This approach suggests either profound wisdom, delegating to those better suited to understand local conditions, or profound indifference, caring little for the details so long as some form of order persists. The concept of order that the greater will represents deserves deeper examination. Order in Elden Ring is not simply peace or harmony, not merely the absence of conflict. Order is structure. It is the imposition of law and principle upon existence, the establishment of rules that govern how reality operates. When the Elden Beast is described as the living incarnation of the concept of order, this means it embodies not a specific set of laws, but the very idea that laws should exist and govern existence. The Elden Ring itself, which the Elden Beast becomes, serves as the mechanism through which order is encoded into the lands between. The ring is composed of runes, each representing a fundamental law or principle that governs some aspect of reality. Life, death, causality, regression. These and other concepts are given form as runes within the ring, creating a cosmic operating system that determines how existence functions in the lands between. This understanding illuminates why the shattering of the Elden Ring proved so catastrophic. It was not merely a political crisis or a power vacuum. The shattering disrupted the fundamental laws governing reality itself, creating a world where the principles of order no longer held consistent sway. Small wonder that madness, corruption, and chaos spread across the lands between when the very structure of existence fractured. Even at the height of the Golden Order's power, even when the Elden Ring remained intact and Marika ruled as the Greater Will's chosen vessel, questions lingered about the true nature and benevolence of this distant cosmic force. The Greater Will's order required the removal of death from the natural cycle, trapping souls in an eternal recursion of life and rebirth through the Erdtree. It demanded conformity, punishing or exiling those whose forms or philosophies did not align with its vision. The omens with their horned bodies, the misbegotten with their wings, the practitioners of death sorcery, all found themselves persecuted under an order that claimed divine sanction. The Greater Will, dwelling in its lightless void beyond the stars, shaped the lands between according to its vision of how existence should be structured. But whether that vision represented wisdom or tyranny, enlightenment or oppression, remained and remains a matter of profound uncertainty. The Golden Order's faithful proclaimed the Greater Will's benevolence and the blessing of its gaze. Heretics and rebels saw only a distant tyrant imposing an order that served its own inscrutable purposes, rather than the genuine flourishing of those subject to its rule. Chapter 3. Metyr, Mother of Fingers. Long before the Elden Beast descended, before the Golden Order rose to prominence, before even the concept of the Elden Ring took form in the lands between, the first envoy of the Greater Will arrived. Metyr, described as the magnificent gleaming daughter of the Greater Will, came to the lands between as a shooting star, the very first to fall from the cosmos into this realm. Her arrival marked the beginning of the Greater Will's direct involvement in the fate of this world, the first step in a plan to impose order upon what had previously existed as something wilder, less structured, more primal. Metyr's nature defies easy categorization. She is described as the mother of fingers, the progenitor of the two fingers that would guide Empyreans and the finger creepers that infest certain regions of the lands between. Her body, encountered in the depths beneath the Cathedral of Manus Metyr, presents as a grotesque mass of fingers and wounds, a being that seems more alien entity than recognizable life form. Yet she was gleaming, magnificent, a daughter of cosmic divinity, sent to bridge the gap between the Greater Will and the world it sought to shape. Metyr possessed something crucial to her mission, something that elevated her above the status of mere envoy and made her the linchpin of the entire system the Greater Will sought to establish. Between the fingers of her tail, she held a microcosm, a device or organ that allowed her to receive messages directly from the greater will. Through this microcosm, Metyr could maintain communication with her distant progenitor, receiving instructions, guidance, the will of the Order itself transmitted from the lightless void beyond the stars. This capacity for communication made Metyr essential. She became the conduit through which the Greater Will's vision could be translated into action within the lands between. From Metyr came the two fingers, each one presumably connected to her, and through her to the Greater Will itself. The two fingers, in turn, would select Empyreans, individuals with the capacity to ascend to godhood and bear the Elden Ring once it arrived. They would guide these chosen candidates, providing direction that ostensibly came from the Greater Will through Metyr's mediation. The system seemed perfect in its design. The Greater Will, dwelling in its cosmic realm, needed agents who could operate in the physical world of the lands between. Metyr served as the bridge, and the two fingers she birthed served as the Greater Will's hands, directly intervening to shape events according to divine plan. For a time, perhaps a very long time, this system functioned as intended. But something went catastrophically wrong. At some point in the ancient past, the Greater Will ceased communicating with Metyr. The messages through her microcosm, the divine instructions that gave purpose and direction to her existence, simply stopped. The reason for this silence remains unknown and perhaps unknowable. Did the Greater Will die? Did it turn its attention elsewhere, abandoning the lands between to pursue other cosmic concerns? Did it simply lose interest, its attention span operating on scales so vast that the entire history of the lands between represents but a momentary distraction? Or perhaps, most disturbingly, the Greater Will never cared as much as those who served it believed. Perhaps its engagement with the lands between was always temporary, an experiment or test that it observed for a time before moving on. The lightless void may have swallowed even the Greater Will's interest in its own creation. Whatever the cause, the effect on Metyr proved devastating. Cut off from her purpose, unable to fulfill her function as conduit for the Greater Will's voice, Metyr descended into madness. Her physical form shows evidence of this corruption. Her body is covered with unhealed wounds, deep lacerations that fester and weep. Her belly has been split wide open, revealing gore and what appears to be stillborn, malformed fingers that never fully developed. More of these incomplete fingers protrude from lesions on her neck and tail. Her microcosm, that crucial organ that once revealed the Greater Will's messages, appears clouded like an eye with cataracts, no longer clear and functional, but diseased and failing. Most tellingly, Metyr's ringed finger was removed at some point, severed from her body. This injury may have been inflicted by the Nox of Nokron, the Eternal City's inhabitants who created the Finger Slayer blade. That weapon, capable of harming the otherwise invulnerable Two Fingers, may have been turned against Metyr herself, wounding the mother to attack the children. In her madness and isolation, Metyr continued to birth fingers, but whereas the Two Fingers served as envoys meant to guide and select, Metyr began producing finger creepers, those spider-like monstrosities constructed of fingers that crawl and scuttle through ruins and caverns. These creatures represent Metyr's degraded state, the corruption of her original purpose into something monstrous and wrong. Where she once created fingers that would speak with the voice of the greater will, she now spawns horrors that serve no purpose beyond spreading fear and death. The Two Fingers she had created earlier persisted, positioned at divine towers throughout the lands between, claiming to still speak with the greater will's authority. But here the true horror of the situation reveals itself. With Metyr cut off from the greater will, with no messages coming through her microcosm for eons, the Two Fingers had no genuine divine guidance to offer. They were orphaned, abandoned by their creator and their creator's creator, left to improvise and make decisions based on their own limited understanding. Yet, they continued to claim divine authority. They continued to select Empyreans. They continued to offer guidance, to make pronouncements about the greater will's intent and purpose. Every finger reader who claimed to interpret the Two Fingers' words, every decision made under the belief that it reflected the greater will's desire, all of it rested on a foundation of lies. Not deliberate lies necessarily, but the institutional perpetuation of a fiction that the Two Fingers themselves may have come to believe. This revelation, discovered in the shadow of the Erdtree expansion, through encounters with Metyr and conversations with Count Ymir, fundamentally undermines the entire legitimacy of the Golden Order. If the Two Fingers never truly received guidance from the greater will, if they operated for ages without divine instruction, then every major decision attributed to the greater will's wisdom was actually made by abandoned proxies, guessing at what their distant master might want. Marika's selection as Empyrean, her ascension to godhood, the structure of the Golden Order itself, did any of it truly reflect the greater will's intent? Or was it all the improvisation of broken systems trying to fulfill their original purpose despite having lost contact with the source of that purpose? Count Ymir, perhaps the only living person who truly understands the depth of this catastrophe, speaks of the Two Fingers with pity rather than reverence. He calls them unripe children, victims themselves of Metyr's damaged and unhinged state. He recognizes that they harbor no love for humanity, that their guidance has been unsound from the start, that the entire edifice of faith built upon their supposed authority rests on nothing. When encountered in the depths beneath the cathedral of Manus Metyr in the location called the Finger Birthing Grounds. Metyr presents as one of the most alien and disturbing bosses in Elden Ring. She crawls on finger legs, fires beams from her bloodshot eye, channels gravity magic through her clouded microcosm. In her second phase, she takes flight. Her cosmic power is fully unleashed, revealing the magnitude of power that once served the greater will's purpose, now corrupted by abandonment and madness. Yet, even in her madness, even in her corruption, Metyr does not truly die when defeated. Unlike every other boss in Elden Ring, she does not fade away upon death. Instead, she disappears into the microcosm she once held between her tail fingers, vanishing from physical space into whatever realm that device connects to. Whether this represents death, retreat, transformation, or something else entirely, remains unclear. Perhaps Metyr, as the greater will's daughter, cannot truly die. Perhaps she merely returns to that lightless void from which she originally came, bearing news of her failure back to her parent who ceased listening long ago. The remembrance gained from defeating Metyr speaks of her being the first shooting star to fall upon the lands between, emphasizing that she arrived even before the golden star bearing the Elden Beast. This chronology matters because it means Metyr was meant to lay the groundwork to establish the system of communication and guidance that would prepare the lands between for the greater will's ultimate vision, the Elden Ring itself. She was the herald, the forerunner, the one who would ensure that when the order finally arrived in its fullest form, there would be structures in place to receive and implement it. But with Metyr's madness and the two fingers' broken guidance, that preparation became corrupted. The system that was supposed to serve the greater will's vision instead began operating according to its own degraded logic, creating something that resembled order but might differ significantly from what the greater will had intended if it continued to maintain involvement. Chapter 4: The Elden Beast. After Metyr's arrival, after she had established her position as the greater will's first envoy to the lands between, a second shooting star descended from the cosmos. This one gleamed with golden light, a stark contrast to the world it entered. Within this star traveled the Elden Beast, and with it came the greater will's ultimate gift and burden to the lands between, the vision that would become the Elden Ring itself. The Elden Beast represents something fundamentally different from Metyr. Where Metyr served as a communicator and birthed intermediaries, the Elden Beast embodied the greater will's actual power and purpose. Described as the vassal beast of the greater will and the living incarnation of the concept of order, the Elden Beast was not merely a messenger or agent. It was and is the manifestation of the cosmic principle that the greater will sought to impose upon reality. To call the Elden Beast a beast at all seems almost misleading for it transcends any conventional understanding of that term. When finally encountered in the depths of the Erdtree after defeating Radagon's physical form, the Elden Beast reveals itself as something that appears simultaneously organic and cosmic. A creature of flowing golden energy that moves through the shallows of its arena like a living star, swimming through space given liquid form. Its body seems both defined and nebulous, solid enough to wield the massive sword it forges from Radagon's defeated corpse, yet also capable of disappearing underwater, only to emerge elsewhere in its domain. Golden rings emanate from it, closing in on opponents with the inevitability of cosmic law. Holy attacks of devastating power flow from its form, each one a reminder that this is no mere powerful creature, but the physical embodiment of divine principle. The Elden Beast's arrival marked a turning point in the history of the lands between. Before it came, the world existed in what might be called the Age of the Crucible, a time of primordial vitality when life took wild and varied forms, when the rigid categories that would later define the Golden Order had not yet been imposed. Ancient dragons ruled. The power of the Crucible blended life together in ways both beautiful and strange. Death was wielded by the gloam-eyed queen and her god-skin apostles. The lands between thrived in chaotic multiplicity. The Elden Beast brought the promise and threat of structure. It carried within itself the blueprint for a new order, a system of laws and principles that would govern how existence functioned in the lands between. But this system required a vessel, a god who could bear it and enact it within the physical world. The Elden Beast could embody order, but it could not rule in the conventional sense. It needed a queen. The selection of Marika as that queen, as the Empyrean who would ascend to godhood and become the vessel for the Elden Ring, represented the culmination of what the Elden Beast brought to the lands between. When Marika ascended at the gate of divinity, when she took the Elden Ring into herself, the Elden Beast became inextricably bound to her. It dwelled within her, merged with her, sharing space with Radagon, her other self, creating a tripartite unity of goddess, Elden Lord, and living order. The nature of this binding deserves examination. Marika was not simply carrying the Elden Ring as one might carry a powerful artifact. She had become its vessel in the most literal sense, her body serving as the container for the cosmic power the Elden Beast represented. The Elden Beast did not cease to exist as a separate entity, but neither did it remain wholly separate from Marika. They were bound together, God and goddess, order and the one who would enact order, in a union that would define an entire age. This relationship explains the curious nature of the final confrontation in Elden Ring. When the Tarnished reaches the heart of the Erdtree, they find Marika imprisoned, her body shackled and crucified. But when they move to approach her, Radagon asserts control of their shared body, wielding Marika's physical form against the intruder. The fight against Radagon is a fight against the god who most loyally served the Greater Will's vision, who tried to repair the Elden Ring after Marika shattered it. But even defeating Radagon does not end the conflict. As Radagon's body lies broken, light erupts from within. The Elden Beast emerges, the living incarnation of order, finally revealing itself. It transforms Radagon's corpse into a massive sword, the sacred relic sword, wielding the body of the god as its weapon. This grotesque transformation shows the true power dynamic. Radagon and Marika were always vessels, containers for the Elden Beast's power, tools through which it enacted its purpose in the lands between. The Elden Beast's arena exists as a strange space, a vast shallow sea under an aurora-filled sky. Golden light dances across dark waters. Whether this space exists within the Erdtree itself or represents some pocket dimension created by the Elden Beast's power remains unclear. What matters is that here, in this place outside normal reality, order itself can be confronted and challenged. To fight the Elden Beast is to fight the concept of order made manifest. Its attacks draw upon cosmic power, gravity manipulation that creates rings of force, beams of pure light, cascades of holy spears that fall like divine judgment. Most notably, it can cast Elden Stars, the legendary incantation that represents the Greater Will's initial gift to the lands between. The incantation, Elden Stars itself, provides crucial lore about the Elden Beast's arrival. Its description states that long ago, the Greater Will sent a golden star bearing a beast into the lands between, which would later become the Elden Ring. This phrasing deserves careful attention. The beast itself would become the Elden Ring, not simply carry it or guard it. The Elden Beast transformed, or was always meant to transform, into the Elden Ring, its very essence becoming the cosmic operating system that would govern the lands between. The mechanics of this transformation remain mysterious. Perhaps when Marika took the Elden Ring into herself at her ascension, she was actually taking the Elden Beast into herself, and what appeared as a ring of golden light was actually the Elden Beast's power given symbolic form. The great runes that the demigods claimed after the shattering would then be the fragments of the Elden Beast's essence, pieces of living order distributed among those with the power to wield them. This understanding casts the shattering itself into a darker light. When Marika shattered the Elden Ring, she was shattering the Elden Beast's body, breaking apart the living incarnation of order that dwelled within her. Whether the Elden Beast could be killed through such action, or whether it merely fractured into pieces that could later be reassembled, the act represented an assault on the Greater Will's most sacred creation. The Elden Beast's response to this betrayal reveals much about its nature. It imprisoned Marika within the Erdtree, crucifying her in a mirror of its own attack pattern, where it grabs opponents and pierces them with golden spears. This punishment served multiple purposes. It prevented Marika from further undermining the Order. It kept her available as a vessel should the ring be mended, and it sent a message about the consequences of defying the Greater Will's design. Yet, even in its punishment of Marika, the Elden Beast revealed certain limitations. It could not simply choose a new vessel. It could not abandon the lands between to chaos and start fresh elsewhere. Despite being the living incarnation of a cosmic principle, the Elden Beast found itself bound by the very structures it had created. It needed the Elden Ring mended, needed a god and an Elden Lord, needed the system it had established to continue functioning. Perhaps this reveals the fundamental paradox of the Greater Will's approach to imposing order. By creating a system, by establishing laws and structures and hierarchies, by embedding its vision in physical reality through the Elden Ring and the Erdtree, the Greater Will bound its own power to the persistence of those structures. The Elden Beast, for all its cosmic might, could not simply override the rules of the game it had helped create. It had to work within the system, waiting for a tarnished champion to emerge who could slay the demigods, claim the great runes, and either restore the Elden Ring or forge something new from its pieces. The Elden Beast's location at the deepest point of the Erdtree suggests a profound connection between the two. If the Elden Beast is the living incarnation of order, and the Erdtree serves as the physical manifestation of that order in the lands between, then perhaps the beast dwells at the tree's heart because it is the tree's heart. The golden light that flows through the Erdtree, the power it radiates across the lands between, might all stem from the Elden Beast's presence at its core. Some item descriptions suggest an even more direct connection. The incantation Elden Stars is found in the deep-root depths, deep underground in a cave filled with giant ants. These ants are engorged, bloated with power, and drop runes when slain, suggesting they have been feeding on something profoundly significant to the Erdtree's power structure. The deep-root depths themselves lie beneath the Erdtree's roots, where those roots sink deepest into the earth. Here, in this place where the Erdtree's foundation touches the ancient layers of the world, the most profound secret of the Elden Beast's arrival can be found. Perhaps the golden star that carried the Elden Beast crashed into this very location, penetrating deep into the earth before the Erdtree grew up from its point of impact. Perhaps the Erdtree itself grew from the Elden Beast, a physical manifestation of its power, taking root and spreading across the lands between. This would explain the Erdtree's seemingly impossible nature. It is not simply a very large tree. It is a cosmic entity given botanical form, a living structure that defies conventional biology because it was never truly alive in the normal sense. The Erdtree is order made visible, the Elden Beast's power expressed as a world tree that nurtures and governs an entire realm. When defeated by the Tarnished, the Elden Beast does not rage or plead. It simply fights with the inexorable determination of natural law, resisting violation. And when finally overcome, when its health depletes and it can no longer maintain its assault, it collapses into the shallow waters of its arena. Golden light spills from its body, not as blood, but as the essence of order itself, bleeding away. The beast lies still, and the Tarnished can approach the crack in Marika's body, can reach inside to grasp the Elden Ring itself, and claim the right to remake order according to their own vision, or the vision of whatever outer god or philosophy they serve. The Elden Beast's defeat represents one of the most significant moments in the history of the lands between. For the first time since the golden star fell from the heavens, order itself has been vanquished. The living incarnation of the Greater Will's design has been overcome by a mortal champion. What this means for the Greater Will itself, whether it notices or cares, whether it will send another vassal to reclaim what was lost, these questions remain unanswered. The Greater Will dwells in its lightless void, as distant and silent as ever. Chapter 5: The Two Fingers and Their Sacred Mission. From Metyr, Mother of Fingers, came the two fingers, each one a separate entity, yet connected to the whole. Offspring of the Greater Will's first envoy. These strange beings, appearing as pairs of massive stone-like fingers, often found at the summit of divine towers throughout the lands between, served as the primary means by which the Greater Will's supposed will was communicated to the inhabitants of this realm. The two fingers selected Empyreans, individuals with the potential to ascend to godhood and serve as vessels for the Elden Ring. They guided the faithful toward actions meant to preserve and perpetuate the Golden Order. They spoke, after a fashion, with finger readers interpreting their movements and signs to translate divine messages for mortal understanding. But as we have discovered, this entire system rested on a foundation of abandonment and delusion. With Metyr cut off from the Greater Will's communication, the two fingers operated without genuine divine guidance for ages beyond counting. Yet they continued their mission, selecting Empyreans, offering counsel, maintaining the structures they had been created to serve. The two fingers' method of communication deserves examination. They do not speak in words that mortal ears can comprehend. Instead, they communicate through gestures and movements, signs written in a language of light that only specially trained interpreters can understand. The finger readers, elderly women who have devoted their lives to studying the two fingers' messages, serve as the crucial link between divine instruction and mortal action. These finger readers appear throughout the lands between, often in locations of spiritual or strategic significance. They wear ragged robes and have been blind from birth or blinded in service to their calling, learning to perceive the two fingers' light language through senses beyond conventional sight. When a finger reader interprets the two fingers' messages, she speaks with reverence and certainty, proclaiming the greater will's desires and intentions, as if they came directly from the cosmic source itself. But if the two fingers have received no messages from the greater will in eons, what are the finger readers actually interpreting? Several possibilities present themselves, none of them comforting. Perhaps the two fingers are making decisions based on their original programming, following the last instructions they received before communication ceased, and extrapolating from those guidelines. Perhaps they have developed their own form of agency and consciousness, making choices they believe align with the greater will's values, even without direct confirmation. Perhaps they simply improvise, creating messages that serve what they perceive as the broader goal of maintaining order. Or perhaps, most disturbingly, perhaps the finger readers interpret nothing real at all. Perhaps the movements and signs they claim to perceive exist only in their own minds, or are so ambiguous that any interpretation becomes possible. The entire system of divine communication might be theater, an elaborate religious apparatus that generates its own legitimacy through the self-reinforcing belief of those who participate in it. The two fingers' distribution across the lands between follows a clear pattern. They are found at divine towers, ancient structures that reach toward the heavens, each one connected to a specific great rune or demigod. The divine tower of Limgrave connects to Godric's great rune. The divine tower of Liurnia connects to Renala, though her rune is unempowered. The divine tower of Caelid connects to Radon's great rune. The divine tower of East Altris, where two fingers can be found dead, once served Morgoth. And the divine tower of West Altris served Rykard before his blasphemy. These towers served a crucial function in the Golden Order's governance. When a Tarnished claims a great rune from a slain demigod, that rune remains inert until activated at the appropriate divine tower. There, the two fingers can restore the rune's power, allowing the bearer to benefit from its effects. This system ensured that even demigods who claimed pieces of the Elden Ring remained subject to oversight, their power validated or withheld by the greater will's supposed representatives. The architecture of the divine towers reinforces their purpose. They are impossibly tall structures, many of them damaged or partially ruined by time and conflict, yet still standing as monuments to an older age. They reach upward, fingers pointing toward the cosmos, visual representations of the connection between earth and heavens that the two fingers themselves symbolize. To climb a divine tower is to ascend toward divine authority, to approach the location where mortal and cosmic realms come closest to touching. At the round table hold, the floating sanctuary where tarnished gather, a pair of two fingers dwells in a small room accessible through a balcony. This particular pair serves as the primary source of guidance for tarnished seeking to claim the Elden Ring and restore the Golden Order. Finger reader Enya serves as their interpreter, relaying messages about the Tarnished's progress, the demigods who must be slain, the path forward toward becoming Elden Lord. Enya speaks with absolute confidence about the greater will's intentions. She directs Tarnished to slay demigods and claim their great runes. She explains that two great runes must be gathered before the Tarnished can enter the Erdtree and face the final challenges. She treats every instruction as divinely mandated, never questioning the source or validity of the guidance she interprets. Yet Enya herself exhibits moments of uncertainty that suggest something wrong in the system she serves. When the Tarnished attempts to enter the Erdtree and finds thorns blocking the way, Enya communicates with the two fingers seeking guidance. The two fingers respond by entering a state of deep contemplation, becoming motionless as they supposedly commune with the greater will to determine the proper course of action. Enya reports that this contemplation will take time, possibly centuries or millennia. This response reveals the profound dysfunction in the system. At the crucial moment when guidance is needed most, when the path forward has become blocked and unclear, the two fingers withdraw into extended mediation rather than providing immediate direction. They cannot answer because they have no answers to give. The greater will does not respond to their queries because the greater will has not responded to anything in ages. The two fingers stall, buying time they do not have, maintaining the fiction of their authority, even as their inability to fulfill their purpose becomes undeniable. The Tarnished, of course, cannot wait centuries for guidance. Alternative paths must be found. The fire giant's flame can burn the Erdtree, though doing so constitutes heresy against everything the Golden Order represents. Or Melina can sacrifice herself to kindle the flame, burning away the thorns through an act that destroys her physical form. Either way, progress requires bypassing the two fingers entirely, acknowledging through action that their guidance has become worthless. Some two fingers met violent ends before their authority could be questioned. At the divine tower of East Altras, a pair of two fingers lies dead, their massive stone-like forms collapsed and broken. The Nox of Nokron the Eternal City, developed the Finger Slayer blade specifically to kill Two Fingers. This blade proves that for all their supposed divine authority, the Two Fingers are not truly invulnerable. They can be harmed, can be killed, can be resisted by those willing to commit what the Golden Order brands the ultimate heresy. Ranni makes use of the Finger Slayer blade in her own quest, seeking to kill the Two Fingers that selected her as an Empyrean and charted a destiny for her that she had no interest in fulfilling. Her successful acquisition of the blade and her subsequent defiance of the Two Fingers' authority demonstrates that the system the Greater Will established can be challenged and overcome by sufficiently determined individuals. The Two Fingers that serve Ranni met a particularly grim fate. In her divine tower, their corpse lies sprawled across the floor, killed either by Ranni herself or by agents acting on her behalf. This murder freed Ranni from the destiny the Two Fingers had planned for her, allowing her to pursue her own vision of the Age of Stars rather than becoming another vessel for the Elden Ring and perpetuating the cycle the Greater Will had established. Count Ymir, in the Shadow of the Erdtree expansion, offers perhaps the most damning assessment of the Two Fingers. He calls them unripe children, victims of Metyr's unhinged state, orphaned and lost, harboring no love for humanity. He recognizes that their guidance has been unsound from the beginning, that the entire structure of faith and authority built upon their supposed divine mandate rests on nothing substantial. Ymir's own quest leads to a confrontation with Metyr herself, and after her defeat, he undergoes a grotesque transformation. His body erupts with fingers, countless fingers emerging from his flesh as he becomes something between human and the entities he studied. Whether this represents apotheosis or corruption, ascension or madness, Ymir's fate demonstrates the danger of delving too deeply into the truth about the Two Fingers and their mother. The Two Fingers served their purpose for a very long time. They maintained the structure of the Golden Order, even in the Greater Will's silence. They selected Empyreans who would perpetuate the system. They provided guidance that, however flawed its source, created order and direction for a civilization that might have collapsed into chaos without it. But their authority was always based on a lie, even if it was a lie they themselves believed. They were orphans, pretending to still hear their parents' voice, children mimicking the lessons they remembered from long ago, interpreters translating silence into words because they could not bear to admit that no one was speaking. Chapter 6: The Age Before the Erdtree. Before the Elden Beast arrived, before the Erdtree grew to dominate the skyline of the lands between, before the Golden Order imposed its vision of how life should be structured and controlled, the world existed in a state of primordial vitality. This was the age of the Crucible, an era defined not by rigid order, but by abundant, chaotic life force that blended all things together in ways both beautiful and strange. The Crucible itself represents the primordial form of the Erdtree, or perhaps something that preceded and was transformed into the Erdtree. Item descriptions refer to it as the primordial crucible where all life was once blended together. This blending was not metaphorical. Life in the age of the Crucible existed in states of fusion and combination that would later be branded as impure, monstrous, heretical by the Golden Order that sought to categorize and separate all things into proper forms. The characteristics associated with the Crucible manifest most clearly in beings that carry what the Golden Order would later call curses. Omens, those individuals born with horns growing from their bodies, represent crucible aspects that persisted long after the age of the Crucible ended. The horns themselves are described as vestiges of the crucible of primordial life, echoes of a time when such physical features were not aberrations, but natural expressions of life's boundless creativity. Misbegotten, winged humanoid creatures, enslaved and persecuted throughout the Golden Order's reign, similarly carry traits of the Crucible age. Their wings, their strange physicality, these features mark them as holdovers from an earlier paradigm of existence. The Golden Order could not eliminate such beings entirely, so it marginalized them, forcing them into servitude and denying them the grace that blessed other forms of life. The Crucible Knights served as warriors during this primordial age, clad in armor decorated with thorns and wielding incantations that called upon crucible aspects. These aspects, manifestations of the Crucible's power, took forms that revealed the blended nature of life in that era. The Crucible aspect of horns allowed knights to grow horns from their bodies and gore enemies with them. The Crucible aspect of tail granted a thrashing tail to strike foes. The Crucible aspect of wings sprouted feathered appendages for leaping attacks. These aspects were not considered monstrous during the age of the Crucible. They were natural, honored sources of martial light and spiritual power. The Crucible Knights who wielded them were elite warriors, serving as protectors and champions in whatever conflicts marked that ancient age. But when the Golden Order rose and the Erdtree supplanted the Crucible, attitudes shifted dramatically. The Golden Order viewed crucible aspects as embarrassing vestiges of a less refined past. The horns that Crucible Knights had proudly manifested became marks of shame. Omens born with such features were hidden away, imprisoned in sewers beneath Leyndell, robbed of their horns in brutal rituals. The same characteristics that had once been sources of power became evidences of impurity, deviations from the proper form that the Golden Order deemed for humanity. Yet some Crucible Knights persisted, serving even the Golden Order despite this shift in perception. They adapted, using their ancient powers in service of the new regime, perhaps out of loyalty, perhaps out of necessity, perhaps because they had nowhere else to go in a world that had moved past the age they represented. 16 Crucible Knights are known to have existed, though not all survived to the present day or can be encountered in the game. The ancient dragons ruled the lands between during the age of the Crucible, or at least during part of it. These were not the lesser drakes or wyverns that persisted in the current age, but true ancient dragons with stone scales and command over lightning. Dragon Lord Plasudisax, a massive dragon with multiple heads, served as Elden Lord during this period, suggesting that an Elden Ring, or something analogous to it, existed even before the current iteration. Plasudisax's role as Elden Lord implies the existence of a god he served, an Empyrean or equivalent who bore the Elden Ring, or whatever form Order took in that age. But this god departed, fled, or was removed, leaving Plasudisax waiting in the storm beyond time for a return that never came. The nature of this previous god remains one of the great mysteries of Elden Ring's lore. Was it a dragon itself? Some other entity entirely? Did it serve the greater will? Or did the greater will's involvement in the lands between only begin when the Elden Beast arrived? The ancient dragon cult that would later emerge within Leyndell drew its power and philosophy from this dragon-ruled age. The incantations of lightning that clerics could wield traced their lineage back to the ancient dragons and their mastery of storm and sky. When Godwyn the Golden befriended Fortisax after defeating him in battle, he was creating a bridge between the current age and the ancient time, acknowledging continuity between the Dragon Reign and the Golden Order. But the ancient dragons were not the only power in the age of the Crucible. The Gloam-eyed Queen, an Empyrean who wielded destined death before it was sealed away, ruled with her godskin apostles during this era. These apostles hunted gods, flaying their skin and wearing it, serving the queen who commanded the black flame that could slay even divine beings. Destined death in this age remained part of the natural order, a force that ensured even the mightiest could fall, that nothing existed beyond the reach of mortality. The coexistence of ancient dragons and the Gloam-eyed Queen's forces suggests an age of conflict and diversity, multiple power structures vying for dominance without any single force imposing absolute hegemony. Life and death remained in balance. Dragons commanded the skies. The Crucible blended all life together. Gods could be hunted and killed. It was an age of vitality and danger, freedom and violence, creativity and destruction intermixed. The great tree, distinct from the Erdtree, existed during this age, or possibly even before it. Crucifixes bearing figures that resemble Marika can be found in various locations, some appearing far older than the Golden Order itself. Whether Marika existed in some form before her ascension, whether the Great Tree predated the Elden Beast's arrival, whether there was continuity between the Crucible Age and the Golden Order, or a catastrophic rupture, these questions generate ongoing debate among students of the lore. What remains clear is that the arrival of the Elden Beast and the subsequent rise of the Erdtree marked a fundamental transformation. The age of the Crucible ended, gradually or suddenly, peacefully or violently. The blending of all life together gave way to categorization and hierarchy. The Crucible's chaotic vitality was supplanted by the Erdtree's structured order. What had been natural became monstrous. What had been honored became shameful. A new age began, and the old age faded into memory, preserved only in vestigial forms and ancient warriors who remembered when the world worked differently. Chapter 7: Marika's Ascension. The transition from the Age of Crucible to the Age of the Erdtree centered on a single individual, Marika, a woman of the Numen race who would ascend to godhood and become the vessel for the Elden Ring. Her ascension represents the pivotal moment when the Greater Will's plan for the lands between reached fruition. When the Elden Beast's power found its proper host. When the Order, as envisioned by cosmic forces beyond mortal comprehension, finally imposed itself upon the world. But Marika's path to divinity was neither simple nor clean. It was paved with betrayal, genocide, and a bargain whose full terms and implications would only become apparent much later. The shadow of the Erdtree expansion reveals crucial details about Marika's origins and the dark foundations upon which the Golden Order was built. Marika came from a race called the Numen, described as long-lived beings said to have come from outside the lands between. The Numen possess a connection to the eternal cities, those underground metropolises that would later be punished for their transgressions against the Greater Will. Marika's Numen heritage marked her as different from the humans who would come to populate her empire, perhaps contributing to the Two Fingers' selection of her as an Empyrean candidate. But before her ascension, Marika lived among, or had connections to, a civilization called the Hornsent, a culture that dominated the Land of Shadow, the realm concealed behind a veil of darkness. The Hornsent practiced a form of spirituality centered on the concept of divine communion achieved through suffering. They created jars, massive vessels into which they stuffed living beings, cramming them together so that their flesh would meld and merge in what the Hornsent viewed as an attempt to recreate or approach the divine blending of the Crucible. These jar rituals were grotesque and torturous. The shamans who were forced into the jars melded together with others, experiencing agony as their individual bodies lost definition and became unified flesh masses that the Hornsent believed might produce divinity or spiritual elevation. Marika witnessed or experienced these horrors firsthand. Her people, possibly her family, were victims of the Hornsent's spiritual practices. The trauma and rage this generated in Marika would have profound consequences, but first came her selection as an Empyrean and her journey to godhood. The Gate of Divinity, located in a near limb at the heart of the Land of Shadow, served as the site where an Empyrean could undergo the transformation into a god capable of bearing the Elden Ring. This gate represented the threshold between mortal existence and divine ascension, the point where an individual chosen by the two fingers could merge with the Elden Beast and become the vessel through which order would govern the lands between. Marika passed through the Gate of Divinity and ascended. In that moment, she ceased being merely an individual and became something greater and more terrible. The Elden Ring, which had existed as the Elden Beast or been contained within it, now resided in Marika. She became its vessel, the physical anchor through which cosmic order would be enforced upon reality. But the moment of Marika's ascension coincided with another crucial event, the birth of the Erdtree. The golden tree that would come to define the age did not exist before Marika became a god. It emerged as a result of her ascension, growing from the location of her transformation, or perhaps from wherever the Elden Beast's golden star had initially crashed into the earth. The Erdtree was not merely a tree, but a physical manifestation of the order that Marika now embodied, a living conduit for the power of the Elden Ring. Simultaneously, in the Land of Shadow, a second tree emerged, the Scadu tree. This dark reflection, or twin of the Erdtree, grew in the concealed realm, its nature and purpose connected to the Erdtree, yet distinct. The relationship between these two trees suggests a duality in the order that Marika established, a shadow element that was hidden away even as the golden light of the Erdtree blazed across the lands between. With godhood achieved and the Erdtree manifesting, Marika possessed power beyond mortal comprehension, and she turned that power toward vengeance. The Hornsent, who had tortured her people and perpetuated barbaric rituals in the name of spiritual elevation, became the targets of Marika's wrath. She waged war against them, a campaign of extermination so thorough that it constitutes genocide. The Hornsent civilization was shattered, their cities were destroyed, their people were killed in numbers that stagger comprehension. Marika's instrument of vengeance was her son, Mesmer the Impaler. Born afflicted with the abyssal serpent dwelling within him, Mesmer possessed powers over flame that made him devastatingly effective as a military commander. Marika sent him into the Land of Shadow to lead a crusade against the Hornsent, and Mesmer prosecuted that crusade with brutal efficiency. His flame burned villages to ash. His armies swept through Hornsent settlements, leaving behind only ruins and corpses. He impaled bodies on spears as monuments to his conquest, earning his epithet through actions that would horrify even in a world as violent as the lands between. The thoroughness of Mesmer's campaign suggests Marika's intent was nothing less than total annihilation. She did not seek merely to defeat the Hornsent or break their power. She sought to erase them, to punish them so completely that their culture would be obliterated, their people reduced to scattered survivors, carrying trauma that would echo through generations. The burning settlements, the impaled corpses, the systematic destruction, all served as retribution for what the Hornsent had done to the shamans of Marika's village. Yet, Mesmer's crusade created its own tragedy. Despite his military success, despite burning city after city and slaughtering army after army, Mesmer never received any sign from Marika to end his campaign. She sent him into the land of shadow with a mission of genocide, then abandoned him there, trapped behind the veil she created to hide her actions from the rest of the lands between. Mesmer waited for word from his mother that never came, continuing his war in a realm cut off from the Golden Order he was ostensibly serving. To hide these actions, to conceal the genocide and the truth about her origins and motivations, Marika hid the land of shadow behind a veil of darkness. The realm that had witnessed her ascension and her vengeance would be separated from the lands between, obscured from view, forgotten by history. Only through following Miquella's path could one pierce that veil and discover what Marika had hidden, the dark foundations upon which the Golden Order was built. Marika's binding to the Elden Beast occurred at the moment of her ascension, when she passed through the gate of divinity. She became a vessel for the Elden Ring, and the Elden Beast dwelled within her. But this binding was not solely with Marika. Radagon, her other self, her secret consort who appeared as a red-haired champion, but was actually another aspect of Marika herself, shared that vessel. The nature of this duality remains mysterious, whether Radagon existed before Marika's ascension or was created by it, whether they were always two aspects of one being or became unified later. Alongside Marika's ascension came the assignment of Malekith as her shadow. Malekith, a beast of black stone and golden fur, bound himself to Marika as all shadows bind themselves to their Empyreans. The shadow exists as protector and enforcer, loyal unto death, capable of turning against their Empyrean only if that Empyrean betrays the greater will's design. Malekith would prove crucial to Marika's establishment of the Golden Order, for he would wield the rune of death on her behalf, sealing away mortality itself to create an age without death. Chapter 8. The Golden Order established. Death removed from the world. With Marika ascended to godhood, with the Erdtree manifesting as the physical expression of power and the order she embodied, The next steps in establishing what would become the Golden Order required fundamental alterations to how reality functioned in the lands between. The most significant of these alterations was the removal of death itself from the natural cycle, a change so profound that it would define the entire age to come and create ripples of consequence that persist even to the tarnished's arrival. Before Marika's reign, death existed as a fundamental force governed by destined death. This was not merely the cessation of life, but a cosmic principle that ensured even gods could be slain. Even the most powerful beings would eventually fall. The Gloam-eyed Queen, an Empyrean who predated Marika's ascension, wielded destined death through her god-slaying black flame. Her servants, the Godskin Apostles and Godskin Nobles, hunted gods and flayed their corpses, wearing divine skin as cloaks. They represented death's dominion over all things, proof that nothing stood beyond mortality's reach. Marika recognized that to establish lasting order, she needed to break death's power. An age without death would be an age of stability, an age where the Golden Order could persist without the constant threat of gods being slain and power structures collapsing. So she commanded her shadow, Malekith, to seal destined death away, removing it from the Elden Ring and ensuring it could no longer threaten the eternal reign she envisioned. Malekith, ever loyal to his Empyrean, took on this burden. He defeated the Gloam-eyed Queen in battle, breaking her power and scattering her followers. He claimed destined death, sealing it within his blade, which would come to be known as the Rune of Death. This rune, once part of the Elden Ring structure, was now removed, extracted and bound within Malekith himself. He became the Keeper of Death, the one being in all the lands between who could grant true mortality. The consequences of this action rippled through existence. With death removed from the natural order, souls no longer passed to whatever afterlife might exist beyond the veil. Instead, they returned to the Erdtree, absorbed into its roots, recycled back into new life through the tree's grace. The Erdtree became not just a symbol, but an active mechanism in the cycle of souls, drawing them in at death and redistributing them in new births. This created a form of immortality, though not quite the type later ages might romanticize. Bodies still fell in battle, flesh still aged and withered, but souls persisted, returning to the tree, experiencing life after life in new forms. Those blessed with grace, the golden light that shone in the eyes of the faithful, could see the guidance of the Erdtree, could feel its pull, could know they would return to it at death. The establishment of this deathless age allowed the Golden Order to consolidate power in ways no previous civilization had managed. Rulers need not fear assassination if their souls would merely return to the tree. Warriors could fight with the knowledge that death was not the end. The Erdtree's promise of eternal return provided both spiritual comfort and practical advantage, binding people to the order through the very mechanism of their continued existence. Godfrey, the mighty warrior who had served Marika even before her ascension, was elevated to become the first Elden Lord. He brought with him the legacy of conquest and strength, having led campaigns against the giants of the mountaintops and other enemies of the emerging Golden Order. With Marika as god and Godfrey as her lord and consort, the structure of divine rule took form. The god bore the Elden Ring and stood as vessel for order itself. The Elden Lord served as the god's consort and general, leading armies and enforcing the god's will through martial might. Together, Marika and Godfrey produced children who would become some of the most significant figures in the Lands Between's history. Godwyn the Golden, beloved by all, who would befriend the ancient dragons and bring them into accord with the Golden Order. Morgoth and Mohg, the Omen twins, whose accursed nature would lead to their imprisonment despite their divine lineage. These children represented the continuation of the Golden lineage, the bloodline that traced back through Godfrey to even more ancient warrior kings. The Crucible Knights, who had served in earlier ages, found themselves in an awkward position. They embodied aspects of the Crucible, the primordial blending of life that preceded the Erdtree. Their incarnations and fighting styles drew on powers the Golden Order viewed with suspicion, yet their loyalty and martial prowess proved too valuable to discard. They persisted as elite warriors, serving the new order even as the philosophy and aesthetics they represented fell out of favor. The transition was not instantaneous, but gradual. The Golden Order spread across the Lands Between through a combination of military conquest and spiritual conversion. The Erdtree's presence became impossible to ignore, its golden light visible from every corner of the realm. Grace spread to those who submitted to the order, granting them the promise of return and rebirth. Those who resisted found themselves facing Godfrey's armies and the overwhelming power of a goddess backed by cosmic forces. Minor Erdtrees sprouted throughout the Lands Between, smaller manifestations of the main tree's power and reach. These served as local clusters of worship and governance, places where the faithful could gather and where souls could return when bodies fell far from the capital. Golden seeds were scattered from the Erdtree, each one carrying a fragment of its power, allowing those who consumed them to strengthen their connection to grace and to the tree itself. The architecture of the Golden Order took physical form in Leyndell, the capital city that grew at the foot of the Erdtree. This became the heart of divine rule, home to the most faithful, seat of Marika's throne, and location of the Elden Throne itself, where the Elden Ring resided within its goddess vessel. The city's golden spires reached toward the tree above, its building arranged in concentric rings that mimicked the ring's structure, its very design reflecting the order it served. But even as the Golden Order consolidated power and spread its influence, tensions and contradictions lurked within its foundations. The removal of death created a world where life accumulated without release, where souls cycled through the tree but never truly moved on. This would eventually lead to problems, a sense of stagnation, to the Erdtree itself growing torpid and ceasing to accept souls, even as it continued to draw them in. The persecution of those who bore crucible aspects, the marginalization of omens and misbegotten, the imprisonment of Morgoth and Mohg despite their royal blood. All of these revealed an order built on rigid categories and hierarchies that could not accommodate the diversity of forms life had taken in earlier ages. The Golden Order brought stability and structure, but at the cost of freedom and acceptance for those who did not fit its narrow vision of proper existence. Chapter 9: The Laws of the Golden Order. Philosophy Made Reality. The Golden Order was not merely a political structure or religious organization. It represented a comprehensive worldview, a philosophical system that claimed to explain the fundamental nature of reality and how existence should be structured. At the heart of this philosophy lay two principles, two laws that supposedly governed all things: the law of regression and the law of causality. Together, these laws formed the foundation of Golden Order fundamentalism, the scholarly pursuit of understanding the cosmic principles that the Elden Ring embodied. The law of regression states that all things yearn to eternally converge. This principle recognizes a gravitational pull in meaning and existence, a tendency for separate entities to be drawn back toward unity. Where the fracturing of the one great created multiplicity and separation, the law of regression represents the counterforce, the yearning to return to wholeness, even while maintaining individual identity. It is the recognition that all separate things still carry within them the memory or potential of the unity from which they emerged. In practical terms, the law of regression manifests in the connections between things, in the patterns that repeat across different scales, in the sympathy between similar entities. It explains why incantations can affect multiple targets of the same type, why certain magics work through symbolic connections, why family members share characteristics that bind them together. The law of regression suggests that separation is never complete, that all things remain connected by invisible threads of meaning and relation. The law of causality, in contrast, states that all things exist in chains of relation, pulling at one another. This principle acknowledges that actions have consequences, that causes produce effects, that nothing exists in isolation. Every event emerges from prior conditions and creates the conditions for subsequent events. Reality is not random, but structured by these chains of causation, with each link connecting to others in patterns that can be understood and potentially manipulated. Together, these two laws create dynamic tension. Regression pulls toward unity, while causality creates differentiation through the multiplication of relations. Things yearn to converge, even as they are separated by the chains of cause and effect that link them to the vast web of reality. This tension, this interplay between convergence and differentiation, defines how existence operates under the Golden Order's understanding. Golden Order fundamentalism emerged as the scholarly discipline devoted to studying and applying these laws. Fundamentalists were not mere clerics performing rote religious duties. They were investigators of cosmic principle, researchers seeking to understand the deepest structures of reality through contemplation of the Elden Ring and its runes. They developed incantations based on their understanding of these laws, spells that could manipulate reality according to fundamental principles rather than merely channeling divine power. Radagon himself, the red-haired champion who was also Marika's other self, devoted significant time to studying fundamentalism. His research and discoveries contributed to the development of fundamentalist incantations, spells that drew on pure principle rather than faith alone. The Radagon's Rings of Light incantation, which summons golden rings that sweep outward to strike enemies, embodies fundamentalist principle-made attack, using the geometry of the Elden Ring itself as a weapon. The law of regression found expressions in incantations like Law of Regression itself, a spell that would reveal what is concealed. This makes sense given the principle it embodies. If all things yearn to converge, then illusions and deceptions represent artificial separations that regression can collapse, revealing the underlying unity or truth. The statue of Radagon in Leyndell, which transforms into Marika when law of regression is cast upon it, demonstrates this principle dramatically. The apparent separation between Radagon and Marika collapses under regression, revealing their underlying unity. The law of causality manifests in incantations that trace or exploit chains of relation, triple rings of light, an advanced fundamentalist spell, creates multiple rings that seek targets according to causal principles. The very structure of the spell reflects its philosophical underpinning, using geometric forms to express relationships between caster, magic, and targets. But fundamentalism was not merely an academic pursuit without practical implications. Understanding these laws allowed fundamentalists to question and potentially challenge aspects of the Golden Order itself. If regression reveals what is concealed, what happens when it is turned upon the Order's most sacred truths? If causality demands that all things exist in chains of relation, what does that say about the greater will's supposed transcendence, its claim to exist beyond the web of cause and effect? Miquella, perhaps the most brilliant mind among Marika's children, pursued Golden Order fundamentalism to its logical conclusions and found them wanting. He discovered that fundamentalism could not cure his sister Melania's scarlet rot. He realized that the Golden Order, as structured, could not accommodate certain forms of existence, could not solve certain problems, could not fulfill certain needs. His disillusionment with fundamentalism led him to develop unalloyed gold, a substance that could resist the influence of outer gods, suggesting that the Golden Order's philosophy was incomplete or inefficient. Even Marika herself appears to have questioned the principles underlying her own order. Her words, recorded in fragments found throughout the lands between, suggests a ruler increasingly uncertain about the system she established and maintained. She speaks of examining the Golden Order closely, of considering whether it truly represents the best path, of weighing its costs against its benefits. These are not the words of a divinely certain tyrant, but of a being grappling with the consequences of choices made long ago. The laws of regression and causality, for all their elegance and power, could not account for everything. They could not explain or accommodate the chaotic vitality of the Crucible. They could not eliminate the suffering of omens or cure Michaela's eternal childhood. They provided a framework for understanding and manipulating reality, but that framework was not comprehensive enough to encompass the full complexity and tragedy of existence in the lands between. Golden Order fundamentalism represents the intellectual peak of Marika's reign, the most sophisticated attempt to understand and codify the principles by which the Elden Ring governed reality. Yet it also represented the limits of that understanding, the point at which even the most devoted scholars could see the system was incomplete, that questions remained unanswered, that the cosmic order imposed by the greater will might not be as perfect or inevitable as its adherents claimed. Chapter 10: The Purpose of the Elden Ring. The Elden Ring itself stands as the most tangible manifestation of the Greater Well's vision for the lands between, the physical and metaphysical mechanism through which order is encoded into reality. To understand the ring is to understand the system by which the Golden Order functioned, the structure that governed existence from the cosmic down to the mundane. But the ring is not merely an object or even a symbol. It is a living system, a set of interlocking principles that define how reality operates. The ring is composed of runes, each one representing a fundamental law or principle. These runes interconnect in a specific arrangement, creating a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. When Marika bore the Elden Ring within herself, she carried this cosmic operating system, becoming the anchor that held these principles in place and enforced their influence across the lands between. The Erdtree, growing from her ascension, served as the visible expression of the ring's power, the conduit through which its laws touched every corner of the realm. At the center of the Elden Ring sat what Godric called the Anchor Ring, the rune that held all others together. This central position made it crucial to the ring's integrity, serving as the foundation upon which other runes could be layered and arranged. When the shattering occurred and the ring broke apart, the great runes that the demigods claimed were fragments of this cosmic system, pieces of the principles that had governed reality, now scattered and claimed by individuals who could wield them for their own purposes. Each great rune represented not just power, but a specific aspect of how reality had been structured under the Golden Order. Godric's great rune, though called the Anchor Ring, seemed to provide enhancement of physical capabilities, perhaps reflecting his desperate grafting and pursuit of strength. Radahn's great rune bolstered vitality, appropriate for a warrior of his immense size and stamina. Morgoth's great rune significantly increased health, befitting the guardian who stood watch over Leyndell against countless challengers. Rykard's great rune restored health when enemies died nearby, reflecting the devouring serpent's nature of consuming and growing from its victims. The rune of death, sealed away by Malekith, represented perhaps the most significant alteration to the rune structure. By removing this rune from the Elden Ring, Marika fundamentally changed how reality operated. Death ceased to be an inevitability and became a special case, something that required destined death to be intentionally applied rather than occurring naturally. This created the Deathless Age, but also demonstrated that the Elden Ring was not fixed and immutable. Its structure could be altered, runes could be removed or added, the principles governing reality could be changed by those with sufficient power or will. The Elden Ring governed the cycle of souls throughout the Erdtree. When beings died in the lands between, their souls did not pass to some distant afterlife, but returned to the tree's roots. The tree absorbed these souls, drawing them in through a process that seemed as natural and inevitable as rain returning to the ocean. Once absorbed, souls could be redistributed, reborn into new bodies, granted another chance at life under the Erdtree's light. This cycle created a closed system where souls circulated through the lands between without leaving, building up over time as birth continued, but true death remained sealed away. Grace, the golden light that shone in the eyes of the blessed, represented the Elden Ring's direct connection to individuals. Those who bore grace could see its guidance, golden trails of light pointing the way forward, directing them toward actions that served the Golden Order's purposes. Grace marked someone as chosen, as favored by the system, as aligned with the principles the ring embodied. To lose grace meant being cut off from this guidance, becoming tarnished, cast out from the cycle of return and rebirth that the Erdtree facilitated. But grace was not merely a blessing, it was also a leash, a mechanism of control by which the greater will, or those claiming to speak for it, could direct the actions of the faithful. When Godfrey and his warriors lost grace and were banished from the lands between, it represented a withdrawal of the system's favor, a cutting of ties that had bound them to the Order. Yet, Marika promised that grace would return to them in time, suggesting that even loss of grace served a purpose within a larger plan, that the tarnished's eventual return was always intended as part of the cycle. The Elden Ring's influence extended beyond mere governance of life and death. It shaped the very geography and environment of the lands between. The Erdtree's presence altered the land around it, infusing soil and stone with golden light, creating conditions where certain plants and creatures could thrive while others withered. Minor Erdtrees sprouted where the main tree's influence was strongest, each one but a smaller node in a network that covered the realm. Golden seeds scattered from the tree carried fragments of its power, capable of strengthening one's connection to grace when consumed. The relationship between the Elden Ring and the Elden Beast becomes clearer when we consider that the beast transformed into, or always was, the ring. The living incarnation of order became the mechanism by which order was enforced. This suggests that the ring is not truly an object, but a state, a configuration of cosmic principle made tangible through Marika's body and the Elden Beast dwelling within her. When the Tarnished reaches into Marika's body at the end of their journey, they are reaching into the Elden Beast's remains, grasping the very structure of order itself. The purpose of the Elden Ring, then, was to provide a stable, controllable framework for existence in the lands between. It replaced the chaotic vitality of the Crucible with structured laws. It subsisted the constant threat of death with a cycle of return and rebirth. It created hierarchies and categories, blessed some with grace while casting others out, established the conditions under which life could flourish according to the greater will's design. But this purpose came with costs that grew more apparent over time. The removal of death created stagnation, souls accumulating without true release. The rigid categories of the Golden Order marginalized or prosecuted those whose forms did not fit its aesthetic. The concentration of power in the Elden Ring made its possession the ultimate prize, ensuring that conflict would inevitably erupt when its integrity was compromised. The Elden Ring brought order, but that order was purchased through suppression of diversity, the denial of natural cycles, and the imposition of a system that claimed cosmic authority while serving very earthly interests. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the cosmic origins of Elden Ring's world, into the truth about the greater will and the foundations of the Golden Order, then please consider leaving a like on this video and subscribing to the channel. There is so much more lore to explore in the lands between, so many more stories yet to tell about the demigods and the ages that came before and the possibilities that lie ahead. Thank you for listening, and may grace guide your way through whichever age you choose to create.